Thanks for coming into such a short notice. I know everyone's had a really long week, and if any of us look a little rough, I guess everyone else in the room understands why. My name is Nigel Parry, Nigelparry. I traveled here with Twin Cities Indie Media from Minnesota. We had the Republican National Convention in 2008, and it was a very similar experience to Pittsburgh. And these national special security events tend to leave a similar pattern. They're like tornadoes that come through town. And while they definitely bring business to the town at some levels and raise the profile of towns to an international audience, they also leave behind them a large bunch of legal problems for people and a lot of people traumatized by what happens to them, because there tends to be patterns in the police. My background's in alternative media. I created the first alternative news website in 1996 from a war zone. During shock and awe in Baghdad, we had an unembedded team of citizen journalists on the ground with a satellite data modem and produced the award-winning alternative media sites Electronic Iraq, Electronic Intifada, and Electronic Lebanon. So my background's pretty much communications, journalism, and alternative media. We traveled here to the G20 with a large contingent from the Twin Cities, from Twin Cities Indie Media, and the Glass Bead Collective from New York, who were between them the makers of the film Terrorizing Dissent, which is a documentary that's 2 hours long about the Republican National Convention. We were also helped by terrorizingdissent.org is the name of the website. We're going to call on a bunch of people here today who have, from the Thomas Merton Center, from the Three Rivers Climate Camp that was given a permit, but then the police on the ground during the summit revoked it and confiscated their property. You're going to hear from journalists who were arrested, and we're going to show you some video. And we're also going to introduce you to two people who were present at the Friday night events down by the university. Whatever happens in these events, whatever your opinion is about these national special security events, we're not going to learn anything about them, and there's not going to be any freedom of information when journalists are targeted, when they're arrested, when they have their cameras broken and their footage confiscated. And Melissa's one of 6 cases we've heard of so far where the same thing happened. I'm going to ask Melissa to come down.
Hello, I'm Melissa Hill, M-E-L-I-S-S-A, Hill, H-I-L-L. And I was working with Twin Cities Indie Media out of Minneapolis. And I was covering the event on Friday night at Oakland, in the Oakland area. And I was mass arrested during that time. And when I was mass arrested, they took my camera away from me, and they also just took my videotape of the footage, and I have not received that back. Basically, we were mass arrested. I was taking a lot of filming of this arrest. I was taking a lot, whatever I could. In the moment they confiscated my camera, I had to basically beg to get it back. Eventually, I did get the camera back with no footage anymore. The DVD that was in it was missing, and it was also broken. My camera right now is not recording. It was basically destroyed during this process. Basically, before the arrest that evening, it was a very what I call tense and threatening situation. They were trying to move us around. There were like many instances of medics trying to help people who were injured and just quickly moving us. They were being very threatening with their basically their non-lethal weapons and the rubber bullet guns, kind of pointing them at people at close ranges, and I was getting this stuff on film. There wasn't a huge media presence towards the end where I was mass arrested. There was a couple of journalists there, but they basically were not paying attention to us. I mean, many of us had press passes on. I had a press pass on. I did indicate I was a journalist. There was at least 3 other journalists, I think, who were arrested with me. And they were just basically indiscriminately surrounded us. I mean, it was many students, journalists, a lot of medics, and maybe a couple protesters who were completely confused and wondering why we all got arrested then.
Talk to the police. This is about the first time we've heard about a journalist being arrested during the G20. So talk to the police about this, and their side is that they make an announcement to disperse, and they don't care who you are. If you don't disperse, they're going to arrest you. Or you call it a mass arrest, that's what they call it also. They just arrest anybody who refuses to disperse. Their response is, why should you be different? If you're refusing to disperse, why should you not be arrested?
I saw a few instances where they actually did let a few people go, and I've known even from, I think there's instances where they like said, hey, you don't have to get arrested, because they do sometimes seem to have like some discretion on who they can and cannot arrest. And I think being a journalist and being someone who's there to try to cover this, especially when you have press passes on, when you have identification, identifying who you are, that should be obvious that you are there just basically to cover this. You're not participating in the protest. You're not doing any of that stuff. You want to be the eyes for the whole entire world to see what's going on. And I think it's very unreasonable if they don't make the decision that, hey, you have a press pass. Why don't you just let you go then?
In terms of notice, when we were or at least I was out there Thursday, when they would have this big bullhorn saying this has been deemed a illegal assembly and you are to move or else you'll be arrested. How much notice did you get from them?
There was some notice earlier that evening, but they've been moving people around, so it was hard to say if a lot of people in that group had any notice, because they were, the lines of riot cops are kind of shifting around the campus area, so it's always different groups of people kind of merging, new people coming in and out of dorms. So I mean, it's hard to say like if a lot of people even heard that actual announcement that was earlier that day by the plaza.
Did you hear it?
I heard it because I was covering the event down there, but I was arrested in a little bit different area, so.
I mean, here's the bottom line, is this is happening in public spaces, okay? This is not happening a lot of this was happening on streets around the university. It's a public university. And if journalists are going to be shooed away when police start arresting people, then there's no public record of what's going to happen, and there's no accountability for them. None of the riot police during the entire summit had any identifying markings on them. The regular police officers had little sort of cards attached to arms, which was great. You don't often see that, actually. But none of the riot police had any identifying marks whatsoever. And that creates this climate of unaccountability and impunity, and that's a climate which allows the kind of abuses which we're going to see in a minute in the video to happen. And that's why it's important to have journalists there.
When were you given your...
What about what happened to the camera?
What?
The camera and the confiscated media.
Yeah,
when were you given your camera back?
I was given my camera back after going through the arrest process. Basically, I was taken to like a detainment unit. They had both civilian and military personnel kind of watching over us at this jail cell, and basically they released our basically our stuff with us. And when I got my camera back, somewhere between being arrested and when I got it back, the disc has been missing. I have not retrieved the disc of the footage that evening. I find that's probably the most outrageous thing that happened to me that evening, is that I do not have this footage. I have no idea where this footage is. They did not give us any kind of evidence sheet listing everything that we had or didn't have, so I do not have footage of what I took that night.
What were your charges?
I right now don't have any charges that they have let me aware of. They just kind of let some of us out and they didn't give us charges. I don't know if I'm going to be charged at a later date or not, but I don't have a charge right now.
Did you ask for this? Did they give you any kind of...
Yeah, do you have any papers or anything?
They didn't give us any papers, no. So they just kind of let us go out of the facility with basically giving us a baby.
How long were you in police custody?
I was in police custody for probably about six hours.
And you were held in jail, or you were held? Some people were held on buses for a while.
It was I think they called it SCI Pittsburgh. That facility. It was a process of being held on a bus for maybe an hour or so, basically getting to the facility and then sitting in chairs for another few hours.
Have you made a request for your disc?
Yes, I'm going to make a request formally for the disc.
The broader question is, given some of the things, and I know I guess we're leading up to this, are there going to be legal action, either civil action, federal court, or going to the Pittsburgh Citizen Police Review Board to request action or an investigation of the actions of police?
Personally, I'm going to kind of review those options and see which one's the best in my case, which makes most sense. So I need to kind of still talk with an attorney about this.
So the bottom line with journalism is this country has a First Amendment which is supposed to be inalienable. And First Amendment activities would include journalism and or citizen journalism. I mean, anyone, Joe Schmo, is allowed to stand and say whatever he wants theoretically in this country.
Due process.
Yeah. Now, part of the issue here is the process of collecting data, whether it's video material or standing there with a notebook or taking audio or camera shots, is a part of the process of creating something that's a First Amendment right. So if you start taking away the process by which someone makes a First Amendment action, then that's an abrogation of their rights, and that's very serious. Free people in a free country should be free to use a video camera. If they're standing in the middle of the road or something else, if there's a dangerous situation, fine. But these situations that I witnessed on Friday night, for example, at the University of Pittsburgh, the police were beating people and gassing people who were wandering out of restaurants. They were beating and gassing people and arresting people who were trying to get home to their dorms. I mean, this is not, there was no demonstration going on, there were no protests going on for most of Friday night. It was just, it's a restaurant district, it's a residential district. You know, this was not a plaza where there was this mass gathering. Most of what happened around the plaza, to the west of the plaza, in the kind of Oakland, Bouquet, that kind of area along Forbes and Fifth. We're just going to show you a brief video shot by one of our people.
Conditions which could cause risk of injury to those who remain. explain the reasons for all of this, sir? What's happening? Sir? Could you explain what's happening? Why we have to disperse?
A couple of things I'd like to draw your attention to from that video. One is where the riot control officer who's controlling the LRAD, the long-range acoustic device, basically a sand cannon, starts mixing it like a DJ. He presses the thing that's at shrill sound and mixes in the word injury, injury, injury. I mean, it's just creepy. There's no excuse for that. Secondly, did that young woman really need to be beaten down onto the ground? Is there any excuse for that ever? Has that cop been suspended? No, we can't even identify him. He's got police written on there and he's covered in black and his face is covered. I mean, that one, of all the images I've seen from this convention, that image, if that cop is not suspended, if that single cop is not suspended as a result of what he's done to that woman, he could have led her behind there. There was a ton of police. There was no excuse for that whatsoever. If I went out in the street and beat down a young woman with the club, I'd be in jail. I mean, that's the simple matter of it. There was no reason for them to do that. No matter what your purpose is in the recorded announcement, you know, it's like either we have to fight as journalists for the right to be there so that we can capture images like that. That was captured by an independent journalist, not by a commercial media journalist. It was captured by an independent journalist. Either we fight for the right to be able to document things like that, or, you know, we let it go and just let the police do whatever they want. If you can't be there to document things like we just saw there, then the police are basically operating under a cloak of invisibility. I'm going to ask Vlad to come. Vlad, Tech Blood from Glass Bead Collective in London. They've done a lot of work, including on the Terrorizing Dissent video, which I mentioned earlier, which can be found at terrorizingdissent.org.
We received a lot of reports from a lot of journalists, some of them going to speak, that not only were they arrested, not only were they interfered with when they were trying to film, but that the media was confiscated after they were detained and not given back to them. It disappeared. But we have an individual named Keith whose camera was destroyed because police could not figure out how to open the camera. So he actually got his media back. He's going to play it back later. And there are also other people we can talk about. There's on the list who also basically, once you got arrested, your media disappeared. So the question is why? You have to ask why. And I think when you look at some of this footage, and we're going to distribute those DVDs, I think the answer becomes very clear. The reason the media is disappearing is because there is something to hide. And I call upon all of you to be professional about this, to investigate what exactly is being hidden, why the media is out there. Like if you look on YouTube, you know, you can't steal everyone's camera. There's too many cameras. It's out there. We've released a lot of footage. A lot of your colleagues were in the same boat, so they can take, you know, their personal accounts. I'm sure, we don't know for a fact if corporate media had the media confiscated, but it definitely was the case with the people we've talked with. So that's basically the main point. And if you look at the level of these atrocities, I think you have to ask yourself, I mean, we didn't put that image out because it's not ours, but there's an image which reminded me of Abu Ghraib. There was a group of cops putting a prisoner they just captured at the university in some kind of a weird sexualized position to take a group photo. I mean, I think like if you're going to take a photo of this, does Pittsburgh want to know as the next Abu Ghraib? And if you don't, then you have to bring accountability to the atrocities that happened. Because otherwise, the word Pittsburgh is going to be associated with violation of civil rights. Thank you.
There's an organization in New York called Eyewitness Video, and what they primarily do is deploy cameras onto the streets and collect footage from people who are filming on the streets, and basically use it with the legal teams, defense legal teams. During the 2004 Republican National Convention in New York, Eyewitness Video footage got 400 people's charges dropped because it directly contributed to, you know, contradicted police testimony. So if you want to look at the power of independent media, that's it right there. 400 people were not prosecuted because of video evidence.
My name is Keith DeVries. D-E-V, as in Victor, capital V, R-I-E-S. I'm in my final semester at the University of Pittsburgh, and for the past 2 months or so I've been working on actually an independent documentary for an independent study for credit at the University of Pittsburgh. I've been to city council hearings on the G20 ordinances. I have And following the protest groups' attempts to get permits, I've talked to city council members on camera, local business owners. It's a large endeavor. Friday night on Shenley Plaza, it was not a riot. It was barely a protest. What it was, in my opinion, a celebration of the rights that, that we as Americans are supposed to have, and the rights that we believe really that we had that night. It was so peaceful that whenever the riot cops began to break rank from in between the plaza and the Hillman Library, I thought they were going home. They started to march away, and people were cheering. As it turned out, they were surrounding us. I don't think it's on this clip, but I do have about 40 minutes of footage of the fact that there was no one. Everyone was completely peaceful. We were being surrounded, I think, without warrant, without good reasoning, and that was intimidating. I did a sort of long shot around the perimeter of Shenley Plaza, and I'd say there were at least 100 just like SWAT policemen in black, just completely surrounding us, and not really, the lighting wasn't good. You couldn't tell how to get out. It was just terrifying because there were, how many hundreds of us in the middle of this park doing nothing. And it was, the park is legally, open until 11 o'clock, but I think at that point it was well before that. It was like 10:30. Can't say for sure. But when they started to push us out onto the street, onto Forbes Avenue, there was just mass confusion, like without any real reasoning why we had to disperse. So we moved on to Forbes Avenue, and I continued shooting. There was no violence. There was no one antagonizing the police. Quite the opposite. And we were pushed back onto the sidewalk in front of the Cathedral of Learning, which is, like the symbol of the University of Pittsburgh. It's where there are 36 floors of classrooms. It's the most familiar, most central, most important building to a Pitt student, I would imagine, either that or the Hillman Library. And right in between there was where there were hundreds of policemen occupying our campus before curfew, even if that part, there is no curfew in Oakland, especially on a Friday night. When I moved toward Belfield Avenue, there were about a dozen kids running back up the stairs, and I saw the lights, I saw the cops lined up. They had nowhere to go. So we started crossing back toward Hines Chapel, toward that other corner of 5th and Bigelow. And as I was moving, I saw a member of the press being helped by 3 or 4 medics. They were put down. They put him down on the side of, in between the chapel and the sidewalk, and he had been maced in the face. He was in obvious pain, and we were still moving out. So as we moved towards Hines Chapel, from where we were being pushed, there were at least another dozen or 2 dozen riot policemen who showed up essentially out of nowhere, just starting to bark, "Move! Move!" And the man who was barking was leading this group with a gun. I would imagine that it was a shotgun type weapon, and I think it was the beanbag scatter shot, which someone else that I was arrested with was attacked by. So as we were moving away, from the incident, from the place where we were told to disperse, away and away, and then we were pushed back. And at that moment, whenever he yelled, "Move! Move!" The rest of the police behind him were just throwing people backwards, beating them back down off the Hines Chapel stairs. And I have footage of this. They were, just totally confused, didn't know where to go, and being pushed in the opposite direction of where they're trying to get to. We're obviously cornered. On 5th Avenue, there were lights and lines of policemen, so it wasn't really a good idea to go that way in the first place. So we're on the lawn looking around. It's what do we do? What do we do? And there was nothing to do. It was not a failure to disperse that I was charged with, but a failure to escape. I called my roommate and told her that I was going to be arrested. I said, okay, this is it. And within moments, the police stormed in, yelled at us, get on the ground, get on the ground. I put my camera down in front of me, and thinking that it was off. And I was actually pepper sprayed in the face while I was on the ground, face down. They said, if any of you moves, we'll spray you. I had already been sprayed. I was not moving either. But, so eventually they sit us up, zip tied, and I say, this camera is not mine. I don't know where it went. Like someone had just picked it up. So please don't harm it. I am liable for this expensive camera, and there's a number on the side that belongs to the institution where the camera belongs. And if you could call them, whatever. So eventually, after a little bit of polite requests, some of the cops said, okay, keep the camera with this kid. He wants his camera. It's important. And they're like, what does it look like? I was like, it's white. It has a little bit of red and gray. And they bring it towards me and they say, is this it? I couldn't see. I had been sprayed. And they were far away anyway. I couldn't see it. And I said, I don't know. They brought it closer. I was like, I don't think so. That's not it. They brought it a little. I was like, bring it here. And they kind of dropped it next to me. And it was my camera. But the reason that I couldn't recognize it is because the lens had been ripped off and the viewfinder was detached. It's a viewfinder with an LCD screen. It's all interconnected electronically, and these elements were just broken off by hand. I don't even know how it was done to rip a lens in half, within 2 minutes. So I said, yeah, this is it. It was it. Thank you very much for complying with my request. Luckily, if you can call this luckily, the battery had died by that point. And as you'll see in the footage, once we lie down, the video cuts. And that was it. That was the end of the battery. So they could not open the tape compartment. They could open the tape compartment, but it wouldn't eject. So I think instead of, I don't know if it was out of frustration, out of the fact that they couldn't get my footage, or what it was, but that's why they destroyed my camera.
Mobile broadcast news.
Thanks for coming under such a short notice. I know everyone's had a really long week, and if any of us look a little rough, I guess everyone else in the room understands why. My name is Nigel Parry, Nigelparry. I traveled here with Twin Cities Indie Media from Minnesota. We had the Republican National Convention in 2008, and it was a very similar experience to Pittsburgh. And these national special security events tend to leave a similar pattern. They're like tornadoes that come through town. And while they definitely bring business to the town at some levels and raise the profile of electronic intifada and electronic Lebanon. So my background is pretty much communications, journalism, and alternative media. We traveled here to the G20 with a large contingent from the Twin Cities, from Twin Cities Indie Media, and the Glass Bead Collective from New York, who were between them the makers of the film Terrorizing Dissent, which is a documentary that's 2 hours long about the Republican National Convention. We were also helped by terrorizingdissent.org is the name of the website. We're not going to learn anything about them, and there's not going to be any freedom of information when journalists are targeted, when they're arrested, when they have their cameras broken and their footage confiscated. And Melissa's one of 6 cases we've heard of so far where the same thing happened. I'm going to ask Melissa to come down.
Hello, I'm Melissa Hill, Melissa, Hill, Hill. And I was working with Twin Cities Indie Media out of Minneapolis. And I was covering the event on Friday night at Oakland, in the Oakland area. And I was mass arrested during that time. And when I
turns to an international audience, they also leave behind them a large bunch of legal problems for people, and a lot of people traumatized by what happens to them, because there tends to be patterns in the police. My background's in alternative media. I created the first alternative news website in 1996 from a war zone. During shock and awe in Baghdad, we had an unembedded team of citizen journalists on the ground with a satellite data modem, and produced the award-winning alternative media site, Electronic Iraq. We're going to call on a bunch of people here today who have, from the Thomas Merton Center, from the Three Rivers Climate Camp, that was given a permit, but then the police on the ground during the summit revoked it and confiscated their property. You're going to hear from journalists who are arrested, and we're going to show you some video. And we're also going to introduce you to two people who were present at the Friday night events down by the university. Whatever happens in these events, whatever your opinion is about these national special security events,